Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary arts space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. We are so excited to welcome Traci and Marianne here tonight. Our next in conversation will feature our very own Lisa Allen in conversation with Melissa Fite Johnson. Please check out our website, or even better, sign up for our newsletter to learn more. Lisa will throw those in the chat. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and that we have a responsibility to undo harm and at the same time uplift joy. We acknowledge that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their cultures, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. As we do this land acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror across the globe and in our own country. Lisa and I emphatically say ICE out. And we know that these are extremely stressful times, and we are just so glad that you've joined us tonight to be together. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to introduce our guests.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the other half of the Notebooks Collective, and I get to do the intro. The anthology Eat Your Words, a Kansas poetry cookbook, edited by tonight's guest, Traci Brimhall, opens with this epigraph from Neruda. We know that poetry is like bread. It should be shared by all, our vast, incredible, extraordinary family of humanity. Marianne Kunkel's poem, Reverence, asks, is bread church? I'm no mathematician, but it feels like a word problem to me, one that I can finally feel confident in answering. If Neruda says that poetry is bread and Marianne says that bread is church, can poetry be church? And the answer, I think, is obviously yes. These two poets came together tonight to talk about poetry and food because both write poetry rich not only with food references and images, but because they each understand how those references and images create a universal experience that allows more people to enter their poetry. I'm willing to bet that, like many of us, these poets have heard someone say, "Oh, I don't read poetry, I just don't get it." I'm also willing to bet that people have also told Marianne, in less poetic words, that their grandmother also warmed cold slabs of cheddar cheese until its hard right angles rounded, or that they too have fed their children goldfish as a distraction. And I'm willing to bet that people have said to Traci that they remember sucking frosting from birthday candles, and that they too have licked whipped cream from the beaters, and that both somehow brought comfort. And though they never would have thought to say, my body was less lonely in the company of sugar and heat, they knew exactly that feeling, and therefore they felt that poem. Food is personal history and global politics. It is both pleasure and power. These poets understand this and use this understanding to write poetry that creates portals. Portals to personal and family history, portals to local and global politics, portals to conversations that turn strangers into friends. We're ecstatic to host them this evening. I'll share their official bios and then we'll turn the program over to them. Traci Brimhall is a professor of creative writing at Kansas State University. She is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including Love Prodigal, Copper Canyon 2024. Her poems have appeared in publications such as The New Yorker, The Nation, Orion, The New Republic, Poetry, The New York Times Magazine, and Best American Poetry. She's received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Park Service, the Academy of American Poets, and Purdue Library's special collections to study the lost poem drafts of Amelia Earhart. She's currently the poet in residence at the Guggenheim Museum and poet laureate for the state of Kansas. Marianne Kunkel is the author of Hillary Made Up, Stephen F. Austin State University Press, and The Laughing Game, Finishing Line Press, 2 anthologies and many poems, including one in Best American Poetry 2025. She is an associate professor of English at Johnson County Community College and co-editor of Kansas City Review. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Florida and a PhD in English from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where she was managing editor of Prairie Schooner and the African Poetry Book Fund. Please join us in welcoming Traci and Marianne.
Thank you, Lisa and Becca. I know we made a menu for this evening, and our appetizer is that we're going to each share a poem about food by another poet. We had lots of options, but we each picked one. Um, so I have a reading assistant, I guess, tonight. So I think that the one I've decided to read, Marianne, to you and to everyone else, um, is this one that starts Jack Gilbert's The Great Fires, um, and it's called Going Wrong. Um, and I don't think I want to introduce it in any way. I think I just want to lay it on the table before everybody, so we can just enjoy it and get our palates ready. Going wrong. The fish are dreadful. They are brought up the mountain in the dawn most days, beautiful and alien and cold, from night under the sea, the grand rooms fading from their flat eyes. Soft machinery of the dark, the man thinks, washing them. What can you know of my machinery? Demands the Lord. Sure, the man says quietly, and cuts into them, laying back the dozen struts, getting to the muck of something terrible. The Lord insists, you are the one who chooses to live this way. I build cities where things are human. I make Tuscany, and you go to live with rock and silence. The man washes away the blood and arranges the fish on a big plate, starts the onions in the hot olive oil, and puts in peppers. You have lived all year without women, says the Lord. The man takes everything out and puts in the fish. No one knows where you are. People forget you. You are vain and stubborn. The man slices tomatoes and lemons, takes out the fish and scrambles eggs. I am not stubborn, he thinks, laying all of it on the table in the courtyard, full of early sun, shadows of swallows flying on the food. Not stubborn, just greedy. Marianne, what poem do you want to share with
I
us?
love that. Thank you, Traci. Well, not one about onions. I was I was trying to decide between two, and I think I'll pick the other one because that one was so wonderful and it mentions onions. So I love the idea of greed. I hope we talk about that more tonight. But the one I brought is by Lena Khalaf Tufaha, who I just saw talk and read at Rockhurst here in Kansas City. It's called Eating the Earth. And it's just beautiful. And she does actually mention an onion, but it's about bread. But I also picked it because it kicked off for me this thing I hope we can talk about, kind of how we started to blend poetry and food. And early on, when I was posting on social media just poems and pies,
Uh-huh.
I found this poem and she mentions the signature of your fingertips. And it just like everything kind of coalesced for me. The poem about the craft of pie, in this case bread, but here it is, eating the earth. And there's some words I'll do my best to describe. She's Palestinian, so I think it's also kind of a love poem to some of the flavors there.
Mm.
And to the flower add water, only a thin stream whispering gathered rains of a reticent winter. And to the flower add oil, only a glistening thread snaking through ridges and ravines of what sifts through your fingers, what sinks, moist and burdened between your palms. And in the kneading, hinge forward. Let the weight of what you carry on your shoulders, the luster of your language, shade of your story press into the dough. And to the dough, bring the signature of your fingertips. Stretch the canvas before you, summer linen of wheat and autumn velvet of olive oil, smooth like a map of silence and fragrance, of invisible terrains of memory. And on the dough, let the green leaves fall, drenched sumac stars flickering among them, shards of onion in their midst. Scatter them as the wind would, or gather them in the center of this earth, and fold them into the tender embrace of the dough, cool and soft beneath their bodies. And make a parcel of the dough filled with foraged souvenirs. Fold them in, and then again, let their silhouettes gaze back at you. Recall found treasures of hillside wandering, flint, thorn blossom, and hoopoe, feather carried home in your skirt. And to the flames surrender the bread, gift of your hands. Grasp its tender edges and turn it as the heat strafes and chars this landscape you have caressed. Some grandmothers sing as they bake, others speak prayers. And let the edges bristle to the color of earth. Let the skin of the bread scar. The song of za'atar simmering in its native oil rises up and time evaporates. You are young again. It is spring in the greening valley.
Mm,
It's
that's so beautiful.
fun to read.
And one of the things that stands out to me that I think might come up in the prompts that we've prepared for people tonight, but also is just a natural piece of cooking are the directives, right? Like so often poems are made, there's only four types of sentences anyway, but statements make up most of poems. But I
Yes.
think about syntax all the time. W.B. Yeats said he never revised anymore except toward a more passionate syntax. But I think what makes an ending work too often is how you change syntax or something about the texture of the language. And
Mhm.
that poem went from all of these commands and orders and directives into these beautiful statements. And often I feel like if you just try a different type of sentence at an ending, it does something magical.
Mhm.
Um, and it was such like a beautiful poem of like gifts and beauty and praise. And I think of food as so good at that for a poem, but also I find like, you know, I read a lot of grief food poems and like because food connects me to my mom. But
Yeah.
um do you before we share our sort of like food and poetry origin stories, which was next on our like
Mhm.
soup and salad course, if you will. But you know, you briefly mentioned being interested in the greed in the Jack Gilbert poem. And then I went on a little tangent about syntax in the poem that you chose. But do you want to say a little bit about the poems we chose or each other's poems before we soup and salad it up?
Yeah, I think, and we had kind of talked about doing this, but greed just makes me think of need, like hunger, salivating, but also I just want to acknowledge too that like this is a conversation of luxury, I think, and privilege to have food and to have food to write about. So I will at some point when I'm not speaking, drop into the chat some options here in Kansas City for accessing food. I don't know how it would be fun to talk about food and poetry if you were starving or worried about your next meal. So I think that that word greed gets to kind of the tension in food poetry as well for me, which is like, um, yeah, the privilege of having it and having the time to prepare it and having the people in your life to share a birthday cake with. And so I really liked that there was that distinction at the end of your poem about the greed. Why did you pick that one, Tracy?
I mean, it's one of the first food poems I can remember being really drawn to. I liked Erica Zhang's Fruits and Vegetables early on was one of the first books of poems I think I even owned. But I think I was also drawn to the idea that eating alone is greedy. So the nature of the greed, I think greed is a topic people don't write poems about. Or it might be, if it's greed in its most obvious form, it would be about in a political nature, a capitalism poem or something. But the idea that it is greedy to keep all of these pleasures to yourself. But
Mhm.
so often when I read poems about somebody eating alone, it is a pleasure poem. Like Mary Oliver has this poem about collecting blackberries. And so I think, you know, I also have like a basket in my cupboard that is only for me. Those are mom's chocolates. I all the other fruit is for everybody all the time, of course. But that
Mhm.
one basket, those are mine. And so I think there are those meals we make just for ourselves, or those chocolates that are just for us, or those pleasures that are private, because we also associate like eating alone as maybe something bad. It's either out of shame or it's out of loneliness. But I love the idea of like that's when you get to have your secret pleasures. Um,
Yeah.
my partner, we have a story we make fun of a lot. My love of grapefruit is intense and
Oh, I love
inappropriate.
grapefruit.
He one Valentine's Day he had like purchased a massage table and had candles lit around the room, but he'd also purchased me a bag of grapefruit which was laying on the bed. I ran right past him in the massage table and jumped on the grapefruit because that is how much I love that fruit.
And food is
Um,
love. Yeah.
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 Or inappropriate lust, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well,
But
that makes me think. I mean, later maybe I can read this other poem I brought, but I have a poem about food storage, and I just want to slip that in as a form of like preservation of food, not even for like self, but for future. And so I grew up Mormon, and not just Mormons, but a lot of survival mentality people think about kind of like food for later or food for safety, security. And that was strange because it was my mother canning food that we couldn't have.
mm,
And so it's a kind of greed that's like, this is for everyone later. And I just remember my relationship. The poem is just like my relationship with that canned food that was off limits. And it was in our laundry room and it was pretty, but it was almost like, like that jewelry that you can't wear that's like your grandmother's because it was like shiny and colorful, but like very much not for us then. And some of it got less pretty. I mean, peaches after a few years get kind of like hairy. It was just like an interesting study of, yeah, I guess a form of greed, going back to that word. Because the awkwardness too with food storage is like, okay, well, what about everybody else? And like,
yeah.
if this is for us eventually, then what about like the people who are walking through the streets trying to get something? And what's that showdown going to look like? And so,
That reminds me, do you know the Tom Lux poem Refrigerator 1959, I think it's called, where there's like a jar of maraschino cherries in the fridge, and all of the foods are these mundane, kind of gross, quintessentially Midwestern for me foods, but like how you don't eat the maraschino cherries because they're supposed to be saved, but then they just sit and sit and sit in their, sucker
yeah.
juices.
We
But
should
also
have
like
put
those
like
mundane things.
a food rot writing prompt because I feel like the rotting, the decomposition of food can also be really sensual and poetic.
But what's interesting to me also with that is I think about, so you were drawn to the greed, as was I, but kind of from different directions. I think about food as so good, and I'll use this to transition us into like how did we start our origin stories, is you have this interest, we start talking and all of a sudden food is a portal to this memory and food is a portal to that memory. And I really enjoy food for the way it lives in my life so commonly as this powerful emotional tonal thing is the way it helps me connect to my dead mom. Like all through the year there are different recipes that I associate with her and I cook her food to keep her with me. And so there's a way in which it's like very tied to the past. And I think our senses, and there's something, I'm not a neuroscientist, but there is something about where our scent receptors are located that is really close to our memory storage. So just geographically in this architecture of the gray stuff, there is that piece. And yet my origin story about why I started to be really passionate about food and writing was COVID and lockdown. And I experienced the brain fuzz that so many people experienced where I couldn't focus, couldn't write, complete sentences were a struggle. Um, so there's that great Frederico Garcia Lorca quote that a poet is the professor of the five senses. And so, because I couldn't make coherent narrative thought about my day in my journal, I just started to write down my five senses at the end of the day. Um, which, as a little side note before I keep going in that direction, I do like to make the distinction because this is such a common question of like, what is your process and how do you write? That I try and write most days, but that doesn't mean I write a poem. I draft a poem most days. So I think it's just like musicians have to practice their scales. I think poets have to stay in. I also think that the longer I go between writing sessions, the harder it is to get that fire going. But if I keep the coals warm, it's really easy to throw kindling on and build up a fire fast. But if I don't stay in touch with my creative side, my maker side, my interest in words, the harder it is for me to like build back up. It takes more work to build the fire. So I liked to do, I still do, I do a variety of types of journaling in order to keep that relationship strong. But in COVID, it was very much the senses. So I would always start with taste because it felt like the easiest one because I only ate so many things and I could pick from those flavors. But
Hmm.
then when I would think about those flavors, I'd think about the smell and I'd be like, what is that? How do you describe the smell of like onions and butter? Right. And then I'd think about like, oh, and then garlic is so interesting because it has like a papery outside, but then like the cloves are kind of slippery. And so then I could do texture and touch. And so I could do
Yeah,
all
it's very
five senses.
multisensory. Hmm.
Yeah. And I could just write about dinner and have my journaling done. And it wasn't it's the lesson of it too is so powerful because I've used it in different ways since. I would just start grabbing the cutting board and I would lock into the present tense and I wouldn't be thinking about my to-do list or my laundry or the bills or the anything else. And so like it just let me focus very intensely like on exactly what I was doing. And I am a person who struggles to be in the moment. I'm like constantly doing 1,000 things. I've got like 69 browser tabs open in my brain right now of things I'm currently tracking and trying to remember what's going on the grocery list and all of these things. But because I trained myself to notice those things by journaling them every day, I could just slip into the present tense. So one of
It's
my
almost like
intentions,
meditation, like you're
yes,
practicing meditation.
and it's
Hmm.
so weird because I was just like, no, food is about the past and memory and like a whole heritage, a nesting doll of like connections to that meal. But also it's also the present. So it's
Yeah.
I can't find a good thesis about food and poetry because I think it's so dynamic and can work in so many ways. And so like that sense journal like helped me. But now that I've learned that if I journal, whatever I journal at night, I'll start paying attention to during the day. And I've kind of used it sometimes to reshape my thoughts and help me notice certain things that I want to pay better attention to or to guide my thoughts in certain directions in that more subconscious way where like I'll just start to notice it because later on I'm going to journal it. So that
Yeah.
like intentional time for 10 minutes at night will reshape what I look at the next day too. And like I can reshape my thoughts in really positive ways or ways that I find useful or helpful. Um, yeah, but by doing that. So that journaling, which I just feel like is useful for 10 minutes a day, regardless of what I'm just like start the day with yoga and the day with journaling, just
Yeah.
10 minutes to change your whole life. It doesn't have to be a poem, but those details, whether it's food or another way in which I'm brain training, um, for the future of for just my own soul, but also for the future of the poems I want to write.
I love that
That
word
kind of
brain
helps me.
training. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I have a question for you before I get into mine, but
Okay.
two things. I learned somewhere, and I should probably document this, but it is brain stuff that like of the five senses, smell is the hardest to describe. And that
Mm.
might be just like a poet's opinion that I picked up somewhere, but I do know that it's the most evocative of memory, that like to smell something is the great, like the most direct chain to memory. It's why like I lived in Mexico when I was little, and if I smell a lime, I'm still like in the
Mm.
market, like immediately. And so I just wanted to chip in with the brain stuff, and also um, I this whole idea of flow state, which I think we're hearing about more with kind of like screen time and attention, but like this idea with I think both poetry and cooking food that like you're right at the edge of your abilities and you're pushing out into something that's almost too hard, and that is research says supposed to be the most like you lose track of all time and space, but it's great, it's euphoric. Whereas like the hour gone I was working on this sonnet, or like, oh, that pie that I thought would take 15 minutes took like 30 to prep or whatever. So both those things, because you talked about the brain and brain training, I just wanted to chime in. And then I had a question for you. As you recorded your senses, when you turned that into poetry, or it was becoming poetry as you tracked them, did you find that you reached for symbolism, or were the poems literally enough just kind of having this marriage of senses? Does that make sense?
Um, I think so, or let me try an answer and you can tell me if I'm close or like push me into a different lane. Um, well, I found that I have a hard, this is just true of me in general though. I um I'm coming to understand that my brain might work a little bit differently than other people's. I might have a little bit of neuroseasoning happening because I can't write a top poem about a single topic. Like, it's really
Mhm.
hard for me to sit still and write about one freaking thing, and I find it hard and irritating, and I don't like it. All, my poems tend to leap, they braid, they go everywhere.
I love that
And
about your poetry, by the way.
thank you. So people are like, how do you do it? I'm like, how do you not? Like, my brain is just like a chaotic, like, wonderful. I identify as chaotic good. So I just ride with it and let it be what it is. Um, or try and accept that it is what it is. And it has a lot of strengths and it has a lot of struggles. But I can't sit down and write a poem just about a pomegranate. It's going to end up about 16 things and we're going to end up in Syria. Like, I don't know, like I just can't. My brain doesn't, I've got that monkey mind. It goes and it connects and it,
So they are like portals, like tracking your senses usually can help you jump to
and so
something.
like, but I'll get lines. So like a lot of my similes will connect to a food or there'll be like a connection, but I have a hard time just sitting down in front of, doing traditional ekphrasis, or even narrative work has gotten really hard for me just staying in a single thing. And I think that would be good for me to keep working on trying to do, because anytime I resist something, I have to do it.
Yeah.
That's just my rule for myself of like, with something in me is resisting it, so I have to discover why that is so. But in general, the poems that come out most naturally and most easily for me is sort of like a starting point and leap and go. And so I can't write a poem like just about food, but like this, like similes or lines or connections to food happen pretty naturally. But I don't really write about meals super explicitly or like
Okay.
something very focused because I don't focus.
Yeah, no, that's a
Um,
great answer. Thank you. Okay, so our part of our mixed greens, how we started mixing food slash cooking with writing slash poetry. Um, the best answer I have is just kind of this identity like work I was doing a few years ago where, as I said, I was feeling like I wanted to give up social media. My husband's very anti-social media. I didn't really know the point of it. And then I thought, let me just purify. Let me just do poems and pies. And for me, I think it was partly alliterative. I was enjoying writing poems. I was enjoying making pies, but also in both of those territories, this was a few years ago. I was nearing 40, and I think I was just like shedding some angst and kind of like those are things that I have wrestled with. So my poetry for the last 5, 10 years, I've kind of been working on this manuscript and adding to it and getting parts of it. It's the poem that appeared in Best American Poetry. So I've had a kind of a long relationship with this manuscript, but it's about women from the Book of Mormon and me kind of revisiting, finding them, giving them names, talking with them because there's only like 6 women mentioned in this book. And so I was done kind of running away from that past of my religious upbringing, and I was trying to kind of like bring it back and take control, and make it the text that I wanted it to be, probably so I could just heal and move on. And then with pies, it's also complicated because they are my mother's family's favorite dessert. And she also, Traci, I forget we have this in common, but she passed away about 10 years ago, my mother. So at that point, me and my siblings were like, we don't know about pies. Like, my brother went through a phase where he was like, I don't like pie after she passed away, and later told me, like, yeah, I was grieving. And so I knew that this was in her family, my maternal grandfather. We have pictures of me and him, like him teaching me his strategy, making pie. He uses like table knives to cut the dough. It's like a very serious thing. And I just kind of took it back, but also because it's coded in her family, which is very religious, I've had really a lot of fun, and not to plug my Instagram, but I've had a lot of fun, like again, like with the manuscript of poems, like kind of remixing it and making it work for me. So I have a tattoo of a pie, which is not okay in the Mormon faith to have tattoos. And like last Pride Month, I made a rainbow pie. And I have this like running text with my uncle where he's like, ugh, that's a frou-frou pie. Like he doesn't like anything that's too trendy or like experimental. And so I actually have been sending him things I make, that pies that are a little non-traditional, and teasing him. But it's really good work for me because I think what I'm trying to do is kind of stretch within the upbringing I was given rather than run away from it or try to have this like expansive years where I don't blend them into who I am now. And so I guess I would say food is, she mentions it in the poem I read, but like a canvas, a country, a world. It's everyone's if you can access it. And so I think like writing, it's so democratic in that like no one owns food. And whatever you're feeling about it is really your feeling to have about it. So I think both of them for me have just been so like unknowable, and that's made the chase that much more satisfying. Like, and we can talk more about that, but there's so many like tweaks in both, you know what I mean?
Yes. I Well, and one of the things that I think is so good about the practice of food is that you eat your mistakes every time and you also eat your genius, right? Like there is no making it permanent. And I think whenever we sit down to make art, we want it to be great and we want it to come out well initially. We don't revision. We want it to be like masterful. We want it to come out right. And sometimes like the other night, I was like, sorry guys, there's no greens. It's just spaghetti and garlic bread tonight. I got no salad in me. I've got no steaming broccoli, but something hot's on the table. But like, and we'll accept like a mediocre spaghetti because it's dinner and we need it, but we don't accept mediocre spaghetti poems. We don't let ourselves just write and make and let it be messy or bad. Which is why I like the like I'm just going to draft today, or sometimes I say I'm going to like I think I've started calling them dates rather than one night stands because I'm aware I'm using inappropriate metaphors here, but just the idea of making something that's not supposed to go anywhere. Like the poem doesn't have to meet your parents. It can just be something you make. And also it's fine if it sucks. If it's
Mhm.
just a hot dinner and it's not, you didn't season it well. Who
Yeah,
cares?
my mom used to say food is fuel. So I guess like by your logic, poetry can be fuel too, right? Like it can fuel better poems later if you want, but I like that because it eases up the pressures of poetry writing when we talk about mediocre dinners.
Yeah, you just like there are times where like I have a show dinner. I have like the pie I'm putting in a show. I have like the thing that I'm proud of, and other times we just ate, like, and that's fine. Rather than having to have the pressure of it being great all the time. Like there are days when you have the energy or the desire to put a lot into what you're making. But other times but like with all of it, the more you do it, the more you learn those shortcuts around things, and the more you learn, if it's too spicy, if it's too salty, here are some fixes. Just like we sort of learn in writing, if it's too spicy, if it's too salty, the thing to do.
hmm
But I feel like I get a lot of ideas about how to work with poems because of food, and I think food is um, gives me a lot of metaphors in teaching, but I guess it requires maybe that my students also cook. Is
Yeah,
yeah.
should we move into the main course? I feel
Yes.
like that mentions teaching, and you could just keep speaking, Traci, if that's okay, but we talked about kind of how these connections shape your teaching of poetry. So what do you do if students are like, I mean, I've even had students opt out of like food kind of activities because of eating disorders. And so, like, what's been your experience with bringing in food metaphors or like direct food prompts with your students?
I think it's like with all metaphors, though, you have to make sure people like understand your metaphorical language because we can take for granted that people know what we're saying. And I try, but like I feel like some of mine are really common. Like I like to talk about how poems should be a salted caramel because you want the
Oh.
sweetness of the caramel and the bitterness of the dark chocolate and a sprinkle of the salt. And I'm always looking for a poem to do a chord and to open up three notes. And so that can work in music if you know how three notes in music does something bigger than three individual notes. And it's the same with the poem, and having those three flavors opens up different parts of your palette because but it's a broad abstract metaphor. But what I like too is sometimes I'm like, we need the salt sprinkle. It's too sweet, right? Sometimes especially with metaphors, students can get very excited and then they just put whipped cream on top of the ice cream and then chocolate syrup on it and then sprinkles and then gummy bears and then a cherry and then chocolate chips. And it's just too much of the same thing stacked on each other. Whereas often what a poem needs is tension or an opposition. And this is true in a lot of our cooking, right? Like the heat and
Mhm.
the cool, fat, salt, acid, heat, right? Like there's
I
those
love that
things that
cookbook.
you
Mhm.
need, right? Yeah, to like, you need the balance. And it's okay if there's mostly one thing, like it's mostly the caramel. But when you put in that sprinkle of salt, when you put in that line about the thing that isn't there yet in the
Mhm.
poem, it becomes just like a pool of shadow takes a two-dimensional object into three. You need a little dash of what isn't there yet. But
Mhm.
this also requires that students agree with your palette. If they're like, girl, that Sunday sounded real good, then they're
Yeah.
not going to agree with your metaphor. Um, but I
Yeah.
often talk about like prompts as like the recipe or with a set of ingredients. And I like a complicated recipe. I like lots of pieces to work with. And some people just want to be told, like, write about a tree and they're off and they're going to do their thing. Whereas I like a lot of ingredients and restrictions and I want like a lot of parameters and I thrive there. So
I
figuring out
even
what
think
kind of
modeling like
recipes they need.
yeah, I think modeling the like I know what I like. I think you
Yeah.
could get chefs in a circle and they'd be like, yes, we all agree that like butter is delicious or whatever. But like I like this kind of thing. And I feel like I didn't get enough experience with that in graduate school, kind of being like, well, what is this writer's goal? Why does he keep bringing this poem in that we keep saying doesn't make sense? Clearly, like he's not listening for a reason, you know? And so you modeling like, well, I like salted caramel and I like that kind of juxtaposition of flavors, I think invites them to acknowledge like there are things that food needs to be food, there are things that a poem needs to be a poem, but also like you can have almost like a speech the way that a chef would, like here's what I'm about, or like here's my flavor profile, right? And okay, so to kick this into the next thing that I was thinking of, because I've taught a poetry as literature course where I almost was doing what you were doing, and I was trying to teach a love poem. I forget what it was, but I was like, y'all, it's bittersweet. And we talked about kind of like bittersweet and how that was better than sweet, which is my flavor
Mm.
palette. But what I
Mm.
did the next day is I brought in like bittersweet chocolate because I was like, I need you to understand what I'm meaning with poetry. And I did it through food, and they tried it. And I know you've done this, so let's talk about this quickly. But like, I taught Emily Dickinson, and it wasn't even a metaphor. I literally made her coconut cake.
I've
That's
made that one too.
okay. My students wouldn't even try it. I was heartbroken. So let's take a quick detour and just talk about like, if you actually bring in the food with the poetry and the students reject the food, what do you do? Has that happened?
I mean, I usually do a coffee shop reading at the end where I we project a coffee shop on the screen in class. But I try and bring a fruit so that there's like a non-baked good. I bring in a mochi or a something that's gluten free as well as gluten. So like I just bring in too many things because I want to make sure I'm including everybody and their dietary needs and restrictions
Hmm.
um, in with it so that hopefully there's something that they like. But I also did a spice writing workshop, which I should have called a seasoning writing workshop because it wasn't bodice ripping. It was literally spices where we were supposed to like be smelling and tasting and writing from that. But it was very explicitly, and this was not a required workshop for students, but an optional one. But it was a great exercise in metaphor or simile, because as you were saying before, what do you do? How do you describe smell? Because
Hmm.
there are some smells where we also think we're describing, just like with flavors, if they don't know what we're talking about, how do you describe it? And
Hmm.
like, what does dried hibiscus taste like? What does seaweed taste like? And it's like making out with a mermaid in July, right? Like, how do you like describe flavor in a way that like can evoke beyond that? But that also was absolutely optional versus exercises in which you are requiring students to forcefully participate, and what are the options in prompts and those ingredients or in these more compulsory activities where they have to engage, because I've also made stations around the room for each of the five senses where you do 10 minutes at each station, but then you can taste or not taste, and you can smell or not smell if you're like that smell is going to be triggering for me, or that's whatever. But
Yeah.
like, so I try and make it flexible because it might trigger somebody with sensory things, but
Hmm.
also I think especially we focus so much on the visual in poetry that I really like to get a texture or a feeling, a taste, a smell. I love a stink in a poem.
Hmm.
And so trying to encourage a little bit more playfulness there, and pulling in some sensory work that we kind of overlook because we tend to focus on our eyeball stuff. Um,
And I
but
bet the
it's
students who haven't met that smell yet, I bet that would be really neat with like a seasoning because someone describing turmeric who hasn't really known it or cooked with it or tasted it, I bet those descriptions are sometimes better than the people who are familiar with it.
Yeah, we
It's
didn't
like
have the names
children.
of what we were smelling and tasting. We had
Oh,
to like kind
cool.
of guess. And I was like, is this like a dried tea or like, yeah, it was like trying to
Yeah.
like describe it without having the name for it.
Yeah.
If you don't know what it is that you're putting in your mouth. But you have to be a brave person for that workshop. You have to be like, I'm gonna go with it, and make sure you state your food allergies if you have them. But we had like dehydrated rhubarb, just like really
Ooh.
interesting stuff. But it is a great um, like thinking about the role of metaphor and what metaphor is trying to do. And man, one of my colleagues once said, the simile is the rhetorical tool of the colonial encounter. I don't know why I still remember that word for word, but it made me think about how we're always trying to say this is like this. And there's a way in which that has, especially in the context, they were saying some intense dishonesty or misrepresentation, maybe not always intentionally, but
Yeah.
also it's a great tool for poetry because that slipperiness of description and trying to connect things or compare things is part of what is so pleasurable about poems, is when our brains get slippery around language and our senses. That's part of how like the good stuff happens. And
Yeah.
yet you can't fully describe turmeric to a person who's never had turmeric.
Hmm.
Um, so like, yeah, so that is interesting.
So when I studied with Ted Kooser, the poet, he said that our utterances of like is kind of filler in conversation. We're
Mm.
also just us constantly reaching for simile, which I always love is like not just the Valley Girl, but like that is the thing we are trying for always with our speech is simile. But okay,
Which
so
is kind of nice if you think about it as like a desire to connect. Of
yeah,
like sometimes in conversation people like it when you share your thing and you find this commonality or common ground, but some people don't like it when you try and make things sound too similar when they are in fact dissimilar, and you're like, that's not what
yeah.
happened at all. um and so that
Yeah,
is really,
A.E. Stallings has a sestina where every end word is like. I don't know if you've seen that, but
oh my
it's
gosh, I love that.
brilliant. Yeah. I wanted to quickly jump in because I had said I had thought I wanted to share one thing that just is so obviously an answer to this main course thing. And then I'll be quick, but When I introduce a workshop, when we start like a creative writing workshop, before we even begin passing around poems, I'll build in a day where we don't have poems yet and we pass around a plate of chocolate. I've always done
Hmm.
chocolate and I've always done like cheap chocolate, I guess just because it's accessible and a lot of people know it. And every answer works. I tell them there's no wrong answers. So I'll pass around just this like paper plate of broken up pieces of Hershey's chocolate and ask them to just like do something with it. They can take one, they can take more, they can not take any. And then without kind of like prepping them too much of its symbolism, I'll just have them say like what their reaction was as the plate has gone around, and some will be like, it would have tasted better if it were this kind of like nice fancy chocolate, you know? And so then I say like that is going to be a reaction like you have to a poem that you'll meet in this semester. A student will bring in a poem and you will say like it could be even better. It could be improved with this or that element. Some will be like, didn't feel like chocolate this morning. I don't want to eat chocolate. It's 9 in the morning, and won't eat any. And I'll say like it's a good time to talk about like content warnings or just feeling triggered by content or just like you won't like some of the poems that come through here. That doesn't mean that others don't like them. It doesn't mean that you can't use what you know about chocolate in general to speak on them, but like that is okay. And that might be just a personal preference. Some of them, like they give me good stuff. They'll be like, it was good, but I like it better. Like I like Reese's better. I like it paired with peanut butter. And then we talk about like that will be something you can offer at workshop is like, you should read this poem that reminds me of your poem.
Hmm.
So kind of these pairings, right? And that's, I think, helped with an introductory creative writing workshop to just like, number one, it's just like we're eating chocolate in the first couple of weeks, so they're happy and they're excited. But like to go through the motions when it's not so personal, it's not their own writing. And somehow I came up with that years ago, and I don't know why I didn't reach for like perfume or like pictures of kitty cats or like anything that could have been accessible. Like it was food. And so I do think that our engagement, um our emotions, our baggage, like we bring to writing, we bring to others' writings the same way that we do to like the experience of food. And it's very good for poetry if people say like I don't like poetry. I'm like, that's like saying you don't like food. Like maybe you
Yeah.
just haven't found your favorite poem. And like, I don't like all food, but I know I like food. And so sometimes I just encourage them, like, just find the poem, and then you'll know like what cuisine you like, like you'll know. Last thing I just thought of it, but Lee Young Lee, when I did a workshop with him, he said like, I don't go to poetry all the time or right away. I go to it when nothing else is working to
Hmm.
satisfy this thirst. And he did, I think it was thirst he used. So I think there is a history of obviously like talking about these two things together. And then that we have been like overtly writing about them, I think is really great. Because I think for a lot of people, they're kind of in the background in a lot of ways.
Well, and I want to circle back because I answered explicitly about like using, often it's more of a simile with food, is how the practice, because I think it's the practice of food where I find myself more connected to or see the connection between it and poetry, whereas I'm not like writing poems about pomegranates explicitly, right? But how does food fuel your own writing of pieces? How often is the pie, are the pies showing up or other ways of making showing up in the poems?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was a little awkward at first to be like, well, is that too on point to like write the poem about pie or put like uh I don't know, like some kind of line of poetry onto the crust of the pie. And actually I've done more, I have a few poems now about pies, but I can't quite figure out how to do poetic pies. So if anyone has suggestions,
Okay.
I don't think I've done that. Anyway, it took a while and it took like the right idea. So the one I'll read is about pie. And I pulled from that nursery rhyme of like the three little kittens, then you shall have no pie. So I was actually thinking of like how to remix a nursery rhyme and then was like, well, I gotta do that one. But I did write a poem that's I'm not going to share tonight because it hasn't been published and I just don't believe in it. But it, it's based on a day in which two different people brought me, one in the morning brought me peaches and was like, can you make a pie with them? And then that night at my gym, someone brought me pecans and they were like, can you make a pie? And so it's a poem about like, uh kind of loving through pie and like how and actually Eric you're on this call and it was a friend of mine who I was watching I hadn't planned to talk about this but like I was watching on social media people kind of talk about this friend of mine who had passed away and one of the things was about how much she loved cigarettes and smoking. And like my brain did this thing that I think I'm training it to do that I was like, I want to make her a cigarette pie.
Mhm.
And that is so weird, I know, but I think that's so impossible. And the reasons I've kind of already said, but like that became the poem. So I think I know, Tracy, your poems are precious, and I think we can't just like turn every idea or everything we like doing into a poem. But I have found that like the more I'm engaging with the two, the more ideas I have for poems about pies.
But so I also love the connection that's coming up for me of like this was somebody that where they gave you something to make the pie, but also the pie that you make is a gift back to that person or another person, and then it becomes shared. And I think one thing that we don't think about much, or we get asked that question like, who's your reader? A fair bit in writing, but thinking about like who are you sharing your poetry pie with? Who is this for? And I think that can be because it can be a one night stand. Like, look, I'm just picking these berries. I'm making this fish. God can judge me all he wants, but I'm gonna eat it in full sun with these onions and tomatoes, and it's gonna be so good, and I'm not even worried about it. And I think we get to have those like solo pleasure pies and poems where it is that is for us. That is my secret chocolate drawer. That is my poem where I am greedy. But most often, I think we want to share the pie. Most often, I think we want to read our poem to somebody. We want to invite somebody to it. Um, and and yet maybe we're not thinking about like I'm going to give this to Jim. Like maybe we're not thinking about a specific person, and maybe sometimes we should think about I really want to read this poem to Marianne. Or like I wrote this poem thinking of you, and how like glorious more often we just in our DMs or emails or in the old school snail mail, like somebody just sent us a pie, a poem, a thing that I have a friend, this speaking of like brain training, every Friday I have to look for flowers because she sends me flowers every Friday in a picture. And so now whenever I see flowers, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna save those for her for Friday. And it just like
Oh.
it becomes our friendship language is Flower Fridays. But that idea that we see pleasures in this world and we immediately think of a certain person or we want to give them you've shared on your Instagram, you've cleaned your feed to just poach some pie so when people have pecans and peaches they want to bring it to you because you will also like magnify that gift and like turn it into something. And I think that's lovely. And I want to think about also ways in which that can become part of a poetic practice for me as well, is maybe not quite in the same way it's working for you of like, how can I make that a pie? But how can I take these gifts that people want to bring me or think about who I'm making the pie poem for, I think is a lovely way to think about how the practice of food and the practice of these creative acts can speak to each other and inform each other.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for articulating that. And I feel like we're talking a lot about pie, but before we get into our poems, Tracy, do you have like a favorite food or a favorite food to write about?
Um, I think as far as writing about like it's fruit all day long in terms of because I think it is deeply symbolic, but I think it's also like Lord Byron said, since Eve fed apples, so much depends on dinner. But if you think about like fruit as the origin of sin, or fruit as the thing that will trap you in the underworld, or grapefruits on your bed on Valentine's Day,
I
if
love
that's your
that.
thing. And it's my thing. But I think fruit is something that I think shows up in my poems really naturally a lot.
Hmm.
But I also know that my food practice is mostly my mom's cookbook, which is not deeply fruitarian. So those might be slightly different answers for me. How about you? Favorite food to write about or to make? And what was different?
Yeah, I mean, I think fruit is a beautiful answer. I don't know. I think I have learned I'm a baker, and I know there's that division for people. And I think one other answer I meant to mention was like, I really love form. I love poetic form. I love rules. And
Mhm.
so I'm
Yeah,
learning the more I cook that I'm a baker. And it's helped me a lot to be like, I don't care if the spaghetti didn't turn out, I'm a baker. But like cookies, anything you put in the oven. And I think it's that measurement, it's that exactness that stresses a lot of people out who are great improvisers in the kitchen. But
yeah.
similarly with poetry, I love the exactness. I love the measurements and the syllables and the meter. And so that's made a lot of sense to me as I bake more.
And I'm good at soup for that reason. I can just like kind of throw stuff in and then taste it and be like, adjust. And like it can be messy and inexact, and I can season as I go rather than the leveling off and the measuring and the exact temperature. And I can
Well,
be
you
a lot
said your brain
messier.
kind of jumps, and I think to
Yeah.
make a good soup, you have to be like, why not this? Like the best soups
Yeah.
I've had, it's like, let's throw it in and see what happens. And
I
that's
have a lot of
cool.
soup cookbooks.
Yeah. Did your mom make
Yeah.
a good soup?
She did, but I think it's more, most of the soups I make aren't her soups, but I think it's where my kind of cooking shines. My
Yeah.
partner's a griller, like
Oh,
really
yeah.
good at that in a way that I think it is a separate skill, right?
That's
Like,
an art. Yeah.
yeah. So, but it is kind of interesting, just like the flavor profile idea that it is interesting that our writing usually is our mind on the page and our mind in motion, and the idea that that might also suggest, the love of form is a baker's mindset. I really like, but that, our temperaments, you know suggest that we shine in different areas, but that's also why, Marianne, I think I gotta like, I'll try and make a pie, and I'll try a form, and I will sit still and write about a single thing,
We should just
at
get
least.
together and have soup and pie, I think.
Deal.
Someday. Yeah. You're all invited.
I like it.
Do we want to move into our dessert? I know we have just a half hour. That would be us reading our own poem. And do you feel like we're ready or?
Yeah, I think we can move. Well, real quickly, before we do that, you'd wanted to talk about food and food access and what it means, like not just the privilege and pleasure of food, but what it means to not have food was an important thing to mention tonight. And I know Wendell Berry said eating is an agricultural act. And I think it's really interesting to think about, Yusuf Komunyaku's this great poem about sugar, and it's all about who cuts the sugar cane, right? It's not about how sweet your dessert is. Or Lucille Clifton's poem Cutting Greens is very much about who's making our food and the deep human connection to all living things. Um, so I think there's this, I do have a prompt where I have people trace back the meal that they're eating back to who planted it, or was it foraged in the wild, or like who planted it, who cooked it, who made it, or who shopped for it at the store, and who made it, and like that whole long process that connects us globally at this point.
Mhm.
Because I think who has food, who gets to make the food, who has the time. You brought up the time element of like who has the time to make the food um, as an important factor. So
Yeah.
I have some stuff I can say about that as well, but I know you had some resources
I
prepared
did
or
share
things that you
those in
wanted
the
to talk about.
chat,
Oh,
and
okay.
I would encourage anyone who wants to make their first pie. It's Black History Month, and there have been some great traditional African American recipes going around, just to kind of honor the history of doing a lot with a little. I'm teaching African American literature this semester at my college, and I'm bringing in a vinegar pie on Friday for my students to try. There's a bean pie that I'm really curious about. So it's a great month to jump in with, I think, the legacy of African American cooking and how that kind of came about because of, as you said, necessity and shortage a lot of times. So.
Well, and one of the things I like to shop for food banks is actually, which you mentioned the birthday cake thing. That's one of my favorite things to drop off is everything somebody needs to make a birthday cake, so that
Oh, sweet.
if people going to food banks, because we think about like those essentials, right? Like the dry goods and the beans and the whatever. But like I think we forget, what about the brownies and the birthday cakes and those special treats and the ways that people need to celebrate? I also learned through going to food banks about the need also to drop off pot holders and can openers and other things
Mhm.
that people need in order to feed themselves the food that's dropped off. If you have all these
Mhm.
cans but no way to open them, then that's not as helpful. Um, but I also know one of the reasons I decided to theme my laureateship around food was just in the state of Kansas, we're the seventh largest food producer in the United States, and yet 1 in 7 people experiences food insecurity. And so it seems like really at odds with like being a great food producer, and yet everything we're making is leaving the state, and we're unable to feed the people with the abundance of food that we create in the state. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to like accomplish social good and not just I think art is already a good. I think the way it keeps our souls awake is important. The way it connects us with other people is important. But I was thinking about ways in which art could also, um, like even your idea about like pies that connects to culture, to history, to it opens up the world just sharing a pie. And so at a lot of talks that I have done, we've made them canned food drives to restock food pantries. And with the cookbook I made as laureate, 10% of all of those proceeds have gone to the Kansas Food Bank.
It's a
Um,
beautiful cookbook. If anyone
thank
gets a
you.
chance, yeah. You did such a beautiful job blending the two, the poetry and the recipes.
Thank you. And because one of the other things I asked was like, I I requested, but I didn't like recipe check for those purposes. But I asked all of the chefs, like, can you make sure even if somebody is shopping at a Dollar Tree, because in a lot of rural towns in Kansas, that's what you have for a grocery store or a food pantry, like, could they make the recipe? Is it sourceable and is it affordable? The recipe in the cookbook, because I don't want it to be like I love a good cookbook, and like I teach like Maya Angelou's cookbook as literature in my literature of the body class, but like that woman was a chef, she was not a
Hmm.
home cook. Like she that was a those are serious recipes and they're really hard. um I've tried them. I can't even do half of them, they're so intense. But I try to make sure that like the foods there are accessible for people as well. That like they're things that you can make even if you only have your food bank to shop from or a Dollar Tree or whatever. So that was part of the goal and like what was tried, which is of course imperfect, because I'm not a food editor and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just out here running with my best intentions.
But
Um,
you're the perfect person to do it, Tracy, because I feel like you have, yeah, I mean, you have the Kansas love and you have the poetry experience and the food love, and yeah, it's just a beautiful book that you made. So,
Thank you.
do we want to roll into poems? Do you want to go first or me?
Sure. Well, also just for I know that Lisa and Becca have put in the chat sort of the menu of the day that we prepared, but just for everybody listening and following along as well, the where we were going to end our dessert was that we opened with poems by other people and we were going to end with a poem that we had written, and then we made a to-go box. For people, we each provided 2 prompts for writing about food that we can put in the chat. But also, since I want to make sure we have time for Q&A there at the end. But we'll also put a document in there as well.
I just put it
Um,
in.
oh, okay. And I see Marsha asking about Crystal Wilkinson's book. Yes, and also Major Jackson has one coming out just specifically about soup and poems. And I was like,
Ah!
because I'm a soup girly, I'm really especially excited for the soup. Um, So
That sounds
I'm
wonderful.
excited about the tightness of that theme and how that's connected. Um, but in terms of order, um, I started last time, so why don't you start this time?
Okay, all right. I'm a little nervous because I was going to try to share my screen. So let me see if I can do that. I'll just give some backstory. This is a poetry form that Mag Gabbert, who's the Dallas Poet Laureate and someone actually I met through Instagram, that she's been toying with. She credits someone else for it, but I just want to give her credit because that's where I saw it. And it looks so fun on the page, and I have no idea how to read this aloud. So I was working with my husband this afternoon trying to figure out how to read it to you all. So it was important to me that you see it. And Marsha, you're on the call. I think you called it Poetic Whiplash, which is like such a great name. Um, Lisa, I also emailed it to y'all. I don't know if that would be easier if you could put it up, but let me see. Oh, shoot. Uh,
If you give me just a minute, I can probably put it up.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm struggling with
Okay.
the buttons here, what they mean. So this is the one based on the three little kittens, and I would encourage anyone to take a nursery rhyme and twist it. I think it can be really just easy to have to play with kind of the stories we all know. Um, I'm
So I
sorry.
have it up if you
Okay,
want me to do it.
sure, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, I'll do my best. Then you shall have no pie. Why must the past pastry be withheld? Three kittens lose, losers of mittens, sob to mama. No more paw warmers. Their tears for naught. Naughty kittens, mama says, condemning regret. Blueberry pie yanked from the table tableau. Picture shivering kittens, go, good truth tellers that they are, icy tailed, thin. Think of a still hot slice. Life is short, shortening dough crimped around fruit, nut, nutmeg, spritz of lemon. Mama cat, hun, honestly, reconsider. Be before your kittens could rollick by themselves in snowbanks, they nestled against you, your warm abdomen, suckling milk without end, tasting love. To deny food as they growl weakly now, hastens the ow in me, meow.
It was so much fun.
If anyone has suggestions better than that of how to read that, so much poetry sounds better aloud in that form, whatever it's called. It's still kind of a work in progress for how to. It's better on the page right now. So, okay, Tracy.
Um, Mine is just going to be my cake poem from the cookbook. It initially had an epigraph by Chekhov that said, "Tell me what you want, and I will tell you who you are." But I think there's like lots of versions of that kind of a quote. But the title comes from I was curious why I never really understood why we spank people for their birthday. But I also didn't, and I realized I was like, I don't know if I want to get into all that in a poem. But I also didn't know why there are candles on cake. Like, why is that a thing we do for birthdays? And it turns
I
out
also don't know why we like spit on it as soon as we are about to cut it. Like, COVID, we started like clapping the flames out, and I wish we could go back to that because post-COVID, we're spitting again all over it and then cutting it into pieces. But I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, that's really funny. But so apparently the smoke is supposed to carry your wish heavenward. So the blowing out is just so that your wish is coming out on your breath and the smoke carries it high for you. So just sort of the like prayer candles being lit. But I think that's an interesting connection. But I was kind of curious And maybe someday I will look into why do people spank people on their birthdays. But there's something interesting historically, culturally that I just totally accepted as what we did when I was younger. But the poem is called Smoke Carries the Wish to the Heavens. Once my mother baked with patience and a glossary of her sorrows. The frosting embroidered her wish for a steadier happiness, the knife alert in her hand, ready to serve her love on paper plates. Today, bees orbit the roses, trying to translate pollen into honey. Their wishes, a mirror of their needs. My hunger stirs a dream of cream and flower, delicious as any of rain's brief kisses on the garden. The recipe awakens like a memory bookmarked by my tongue. Years ago, I sucked frosting from birthday candles, their small fires quieting in me. I hold the silence of years, sugar and wax, and a hum that hurts my ears with its hopes. Today, I lick whipped cream from the beaters, and the sad songs turn sweet. My body less lonely in the company of sugar and heat. Bees tap the window, persistent as thought. Sun brightens the knife as it slides into the cake. My fingers make the shadows of candles. I close my eyes. The memory is already my wish.
Wow, Tracy, thank you. I wrote down the knife alert in her hand. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the word alert there. And you had some really beautiful assonance with stirs, the something. It was a lot of beautiful sounds together. And I guess I want to acknowledge too, just because it's you and me talking, that both our poems are about mothers. And I think there's probably a longer conversation we can have, you and me, about like the bond that we share of having lost our mothers and where that is in this conversation.
Yeah, Oscar Wilde said after a good dinner, a person can forgive anyone, even one's own relatives. So I like the idea of just there's already the idea of food as sin, but the idea of food as forgiveness or as healing is interesting for me as a one of the ways I feel like I can still talk to my mom is by making her food.
I have her cookbooks with little notes in them.
Mhm.
Do you have any of her like handwritten?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she made one just for me. Um,
Oh.
and it's interesting and complicated. As a good plug also for Lisa's upcoming talk with Melissa, because my mom and I had a difficult relationship. It wasn't an easy one, and I had was have struggled with the emotional complexity of her death being a bit of a relief when it happened. But also now that she's gone, I finally get to have the relationship I always wanted with her.
Mm.
Um, so now, because really,
Amen to all of that.
relationships are always an active imagination anyway. Like as close of attention as you pay to a person you live with every day, and as much as you know them, you still um, imagine their interiority a little bit, or just like what somebody says and what we hear, there's always a little bit of a gulf there. So we're always using our imagination, our similes, to try and bridge and connect and understand each other. But now our conversations go exactly the way I want them to because I'm doing both sides of them. But yeah, it's been a long because I think yeah, it's been about 12 years for me. She died in Mother's Day. My son was first born, so late. Of like it's taken a long time to get to a better spot with it. Um, but food has been one of those threads that has been important in that healing.
I'm so glad you have that thread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have
Um,
just a couple of questions.
mhm.
The first one is for Marianne. Marianne, Angela would like to know, do you find that the work you've done on your poetry on the Book of Mormon has softened your approach or stoked your curiosity for religion in general? Not a food topic, but you had mentioned
Ooh.
your background.
Um, Soften my approach to religion in general. Yeah. I mean, I think everything's better off when we personalize it. So you can make a cake off of the back of a box, or you can throw in some ingredient that you like next time. And yes, I think my work with pies, with my mother, with the church was always like to um, make it more of a mirror, make it something that I could see myself in. And I don't know that I'll walk back into that church. But my poem in Best American Poetry is like those people who are still there are brave, those women who are rallying from the inside for greater representation. My sister, my cousin, people who are still Mormon. Um, that's great. I wish I could have their strength. So it's complicated and yeah, complicated in a very like humbling way that religion is many things to many people. It's thank you, Lisa, for that beautiful introduction. Because yeah, that poem about like is bread church, it's me figuring out like what church is because it means so many different things to so many people.
Yeah. Thank you for that. The next question is for both of you, and it is, do you ever intentionally write when you're hungry?
Hmm.
Ooh, that's a good question.
I love that question because I've also been very interested in the role my body plays in my writing process in the last few years, just thinking about how am I moving and where am I writing and how, like using my hand to write, but also, my autoimmune disorder affects my joints. And so I sometimes I like talk to text, but that leads to a lot of mistakes, but sometimes the mistakes are fruitful. So like I'm very interested in just what it means to be in this body, and how I'm writing with it and in it, and just thinking about my body appears as a subject, but what is going on with my body when I am writing. So now I'm interested, and I'm going to pay more attention to that. Or if I think there are certain foods, like coffee used to be the food that was the fuel,
Mhm.
but what are the foods that are the fuel for those ritualistic things that sometimes we do around our process. I know, Lisa, you're about to talk to Melissa. She and I wrote in a cafe once, and she said, I do this, and this, and by the time I take the first bite of the cookie, then I'm ready to write. And she's like, I actually think it's Pavlovian at this point, where like the cookie was like, the sweetness was like, it's poetry time, because she'd done the same writing ritual for so long that she'd brain trained, that a cookie means it's time to make a poem. And so I think that's kind of interesting. I'm interested to pay attention in the future, and see if I can brain train a certain fruit or food and as an entry point into poetry. I think that could be kind of interesting.
What about you, Marianne?
Um, the place it made my mind go is I don't eat while I write. I would rather wait even if I was hungry. And I don't know about being intentionally hungry as a source of poems, but I know that I can't taste food while I'm writing. There's no point because I think it's that flow state thing where like I can grab something delicious, but if I'm thinking about poetry, I'm not really going to taste and treasure it. And I think that's a compliment to food and a compliment to poetry writing. It's just not going to be, it's going to be fuel if I'm writing because that my brain is doing the writing. But I can try to think about and being intentionally hungry. I just know that I don't eat when I'm writing, that my mind's not going to be thinking about the food. It's going to be thinking about the line. So I wouldn't waste a meal on that.
Okay. Those were the questions that came in from folks. I don't know if you have anything to say about your to-go boxes or anything that you want to wrap up with. We have a little time for that if you do.
Do you want to talk about yours, Tracy? I'm sure there's a story to the prompts.
Oh, sure. So in the to-go box, the two for me come from the cookbook. So the cookbook also has 9 recipes for poems in the back. And so again, I'm somebody where I'm not sure how other people's brains work, but I know that the taskmaster side, the to-do list side of my brain, and so again, this is a flavor profile or a preference being a soup chef. I really like having um, something that gets me writing right away, but I also like a lot of rules and structure because I'm trying to make sure the parent side of my brain is distracted with like deep cleaning the kitchen so that like the creative side of me can like sneak out the window and go do something I shouldn't be doing in a cornfield. And so for me, a set of ingredients and a recipe that works well for me when writing is to have a not overly complex, but enough things that my to do taskmaster brain has to solve so that my creative side can just show up and do things. So both prompts kind of follow what works for me. But I also, you can make that soup or that you can bake that casserole a hot dish if you're Minnesotan, any way that you want. But those ingredients are meant to kind of, I did one that was sweet and one that was savory, to kind of push you in different directions. But my prompt writing style is very much about what works for me. But when I talk to my students too, I usually give them a couple different ways to start. And then optional seasonings so that they can add those types of things in. But if they're like, that is not my flavor profile, and that they just want to put the whipped cream on, they can do that. So like I usually have a few follow-up pieces because I enjoy the puzzle part, and having part of my brain solving the puzzle so that the creative like looping leaping side can show up and do that. So with the recipes I've offered, just know that they're things that work well for my brain. You should skip them because even when I cook, I usually read three different recipes for a shepherd's pie, and then I do my own thing. But like I know what's essential to the shepherd's pie. And so then I work in that way. So just know that the way I've written my recipes is the way I like to cook. And so that's what I've offered. But if maybe you read all four of our recipes and you're like, that gives me a food poem that I could make. So please know it's not meant to be prescriptive, but hopefully it leads you in different directions. I think it's interesting. We both ended up with epistolary suggestions in our to-go box of like, and we sort of this came up with the peaches and the pecans of who are you writing to, and the epistolary food poem as a love letter or an anger letter. I don't know. If you're hangry, that might be it. Might be part of how you get into the poem. So I have a sweet and a savory. There's a few instructions in there, but if the instruction one gets you where you need to go and inspired to cook your thing, then you should cook in the direction you want to cook. There's no bonus points for following the rules.
What about you,
Do you
Marianne?
have a favorite? I meant to ask this earlier. Do you have a favorite like verb in recipes, like emulsify, or
Ooh.
there are
I
so many good commands, as you said.
uh I kind of like that a lot of them are violent because I don't really write violent poems. But it is like beat, shred, whatever, like there's a lot of like intense actions. But I'm also just really drawn to verbs in general. One of my checks in a poem is when I revise is just to look at the verbs in the poem because early on I was very guilty of my poems sat and thought and felt, but they didn't stir and whisk and beat and seize and
Pulse. I love pulse.
yeah, and like they didn't do those things, and now I'm always interested in the actions of the poem, not in a cinematic way of like moving the plot along exactly, but like how active is the language, what are those verbs doing, and trying to just seek out interesting verbs, or interesting language combination, because sometimes it's that verb plus the noun, or the noun verbing or verbing that noun, and how you that two words together could strike sparks, and just a verb and a noun together can give you a story. So, seizing the ghost, or like, all of a sudden you take an interesting verb and a surprising noun and something, you know, you get an interesting reaction. Um, starts browning in the pan.
Mhm.
Um, but
I'm
yeah.
hungry.
Yeah. I did ask if everybody had eaten before they got here or if we would be whetting people's appetite tonight. How
Well, yeah,
about
I
you?
think
What
there's
do you
like
want to talk about?
the Zoom culture of like the not eating on camera, but I reject that. And so I don't know how much word got around, but I was posting about this event and saying like bring your favorite snack, eat on camera. Like I hoped it could be kind of a food party too. So,
Potluck.
yes.
Next time.
So Marianne, did you want to say anything about the prompts that you
Oh,
offered in the
just
to-go box?
quickly, the one at the bottom is just easy, like an ode or a diatribe, but I love this idea of like making it new. So pick a food that everyone likes, like marshmallows, and write a diatribe against it. Or ode to blue cheese, which is the one I'm still working on, like something that others that you don't like, right? No, others don't like, but that you can kind of see the beauty in. And then, yes, chewing your fingernails totally counts. I just saw that in the chat. The other one is from my mentor, Kwame Dawes, and I tried to give him credit there, but it's really interesting. It is an epistolary and it has sandwiched in this like tense setup. Like, think of someone you haven't talked to in a long time, pretend you wrote them a letter, they didn't respond, pretend you wrote them another letter a month later, and then they wrote you a letter back. But throughout if you look at it, there's kind of this last meal pressure of like, make sure it's someone that you have had a meal with. What was your last meal with them? What did you eat? What did you wear? So I think it's trying to marry, Traci, what you're talking about, like the sensory experience with the emotion. So kind of like bringing down the abstraction of a awkward relationship through the food. And when I've taught it before, it was some really interesting like meals, especially college students. It's like Einstein bagels with like the person they broke up with, and like that's going to be an interesting poem. So I hope you can find something in those four menu options of our writing prompts.
Yeah, I once did a writing prompt about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and the variety of types of sandwiches that came from that, and the fact, oh, I was never allowed to have this kind of bread, I was never allowed to have this. It was amazing. It's yeah, food is a really great entry point to writing for sure. And now we're almost at time, and so which I can't believe. And I wanted to just thank Traci and Marianne for your time and for your writing prompts and for sharing all these amazing ideas about how to incorporate food into your poetry writing. And now I'd invite folks here if they'd like to unmute or say hello to our guests before we go. We love getting a nice we try to get a nice round of applause on Zoom. It kind of sometimes sounds a little bizarre, but please feel free to unmute now.
Yay! Thank you. That was really great.
And so we will put our links in the chat, but we hope that you will come next month on March 24th. So exactly 1 month, when we have Lisa and Melissa talking about Lisa's new book. Yeah, and we wish you all here a great night, and thank you so much for being with us. Good night.
Thank you.
Both.